everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by poet Gordon Meade to talk about his new book of selected poems, Beyond the Ninth Wave, which is out with Into Poetry. Hello, Gordon.
Hello, Ali.
So, Beyond the Ninth Wave, as I've just said, is a selection of poetry from other collections. Can you give us the bigger picture then? I mean, how many collections is it gathered from?
Well, we're talking about a dozen over the years. So, I mean, I've been writing for a long time, but it was first published in 91, I believe, with Chapman, Singing Seals. So it goes from there right up till 2013 was the last one. I think that was which one was that? The one of the animal ones. Aye, yeah, exposed animal elegies. That's right. Yeah.
And just if you're mentioning those titles, we can get an idea of some of the themes that are in your poetry, and we'll talk about themes and ideas later on. But where did poetry begin for you? Why did you want to start writing?
Well, a few false starts and lots of gaps. But initially, my sister was 8 years older than me, and when she was doing her A levels, it was in those days. She'd be about 16, 17. I'd be about eight or nine. And she was also part of a drama group. So they were doing a play, they were doing Midsummer Night's Dream. And I was her prompt. So
Right.
I only got a couple of words every so often when she forgot one. But that was an introduction to some sort of a Shakespeare. And for our A level, one of the poets that she was really interested in was Wilfred Owen.
Right.
So she would read me Wilfred Owen, and it'd be a bit early to have that, but I loved the sound of her voice, and the rhythm of the poetry really struck home for me. But then there was a big gap of not doing much with it at all. And then when I was about maybe 13, 14, I started writing, properly trying to write poetry. Um, Unfortunately, I'd like to say it was based around Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple, but unfortunately, it sounded a bit more like Black Sabbath. Uh, and I'd no idea then about Vanity Press. So I'd sent off this poem, pretty terrible poem about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and paid my £10. And about a month later, the Autumn Anthology came, and my poem was on one side of the paper, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and next to it was someone, my pet rabbit. So, so obviously the editor had done quite a bit of research as to how he would have put it together. So that didn't take off, obviously. And then I did English at university
Right.
in Dundee, and I found that the studying of English wasn't really good for my creativity. Maybe it's just two different parts of the brain and not really working together. So I didn't write so much then. After I graduated, went down to London and worked as a mobile librarian in Ealing. And one night coming back from, it was actually Hammersmith Arts Centre, on the bus, it was an old double-decker bus with the opening at the end. And I was standing on the platform, and the bus came up to zebra crossing, and this woman waved the bus on, having had the bus stopped slightly to let her go, and then she waved the bus on, and apparently there was something wrong with the gears in these old buses, and there was a real power surge. So the bus went forward, and I went off the back end of the bus,
Oh.
and landed and fractured my skull. And I was in hospital for about a month and had speech therapy. Unbelievable now. I had speech therapy for about 3 to 4 months. I had a wonderful speech therapist down there who spent an awful lot of time with me than she should have done. But that was a great help to me. So my speech started coming back, and memory had been affected as well, and they started coming. And that's really when I thought, well, I really realized how important language was to me,
Right, yeah.
and why I want and how I wanted to express myself through it. And that's when it really took off for me, you know. Yeah.
That's extraordinary story. I wasn't expecting something like that at all. So really, was it? I mean, there was trauma, obviously, but actually, it was the recovery from that trauma that almost was the kind of instigator.
It was. I mean, in the early days of the speech therapy sessions, the speech therapist would give me almost like a cartoon drawing of a dog, say. And in the very early days, I'd be just as likely to say dog, fine, wolf, which is similar,
Yeah,
cat, which is a sort of opposite, and or log, which is obviously the sound.
yeah,
And looking back on it, I mean, that's on one level, that's how poetry works. It's sound, metaphor, opposites, and things like that, you know. So I think that certainly did help me. Yeah, yeah.
was it almost breaking? I don't know how speech therapy works at all, but is it almost starting from the beginning?
No, not in my case. I mean, I don't know really in other people's experiences of it, but it was similar to how my memories came back.
Right,
That they didn't come back in order. So I'd remember things from 5 years ago one day, and then a couple of weeks ago the next day, and they all sort of fitted in eventually. But
right.
it was very piecemeal. And I think the language was a wee bit like that as well. The language was easy. To be honest, the language was easier to come back than the memories were. Yeah,
But I guess memories as well feed into poetry too. You know,
of
you want,
course.
yeah. You said something interesting there, which has come up a couple of times when I've spoken to people, that studying, when you were studying English, it kind of took away from the idea of being creative. I know people that have been studied English who have been to art school even that have said similar things, that the studying of
Right.
the subject actually takes away something from their own spontaneous creativity.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Funny you should say about art college because uh, I was right in residence at Duncan and Jordanson a long time, after that, and I was most impressed actually by the work ethic at the art colleges compared to when I was at university. So it's interesting that even though they were more immersed in what they were doing, they also felt that idea that the studying had problems for their creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, And when you were you also when you mentioned kind of your initial interactions with poetry, but were you a reader of it before you started, a keen reader before you started writing?
Not really. Not really. I mean, it was more listening to music more and lyrics of musicians more. Um, as I say, there was the no. I would say maybe just before I went to university, around about 16, I started reading people like Heaney, uh, Sylvia Plath, Ted Hughes, people like that. Uh, and obviously, while I was at university, I was reading them to study them as well. So that's when it. But before then, not really, not a great reader.
Yeah.
No.
I'm thinking back to my own experiences at university, just as we're speaking now, and how actually breaking down individual poems, perhaps poems that you've really enjoyed, can sometimes take the magic out of them.
Yeah, yeah. It's trying to look for it's just looking for a meaning all the time rather than just enjoying them.
So you had to, this is a, as we say, selected poems, so you would have to go back to your previous collections. And what was that like? Was that a joyous experience? Are you surprised by anything?
It's funny. I told a friend of mine when I was doing this. I told a friend that it was like soul destroying, but in a good way. And yeah, it was interesting because obviously with I mean I was lucky to have a dozen collections to choose from, but with having that many and I was limited to around about 60, 70 poems to get into the book. So you had to be quite selective selecting them.
Yeah.
And I suppose I tried to be a few things. I tried to be fair to all the collections. Tried to be fair to them, but I had to sort of select poems that still were relevant to me now as well. And then the other one was hopefully trying to get the strongest ones, if possible, in the book. Yeah.
So in the publishing process, I worked as an editor for a little while, but I only really dealt with prose. I'd never dealt with poetry. Was there any kind of editing process? Was this purely your choice? Were there discussions with anyone else?
There were discussion with David Cameron, obviously, who's the poetry editor into poetry.
Yeah.
So the idea was that I sent him. We managed to get it down to about. Initially, it was 60. I managed to get 68 in the book in the end. But I sent him around about 100 poems to have a look at, and I'd try and select from there. And most of the selections were mine, but there were a few poems that he didn't actually say no to any, but there were some of the ones that I hadn't put in that he thought should go in. So there were about two or three that he really liked, which was nice, and I put them in as well. Yeah, but I was given quite a free rein. So if there's any problems, they're all mine.
That's very good of you. And has the whole thing of being published changed over the years? I mean, clearly it has, but how has it changed over the years that you've been published? You talked about sending that first poem in all those years ago, but how has the whole thing about being published changed?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not still do I still do that. I just don't pay money for it now. But it's difficult because I have a strange reputation of um, poetry presses going out of business after they published me, which helped in again in the selecting of the poems because it's in five sections,
Yeah,
and the first section they're all Scottish publishers, and then the next one was a publisher in Durham, another one in Kent, and then the last one, apart from the uncollected, was published in London and an American publisher. So I mean, I still do the same thing. I send poems out to magazines. Once I've had a few taken, trying to put together a collection,
yeah,
and I just send it out to publishers. And I don't know. I don't seem to have made too many connections.
right.
So but I like that. I like that because it means the work's being taken on its merit, and I like that. And it's very much it's still a bit of a roulette thing to do. Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it must be really kind of uplifting that, you're not using the same publisher every time. That, as you say, the work is speaking for itself because they're taking it and then publishing it. That's a great thing.
yeah, yeah. I like it. Yeah, I like working that way. Yeah.
And let's talk a bit about the themes and ideas that kind of run through your work. What would you say? There's certainly, I mean, it's called Beyond the Ninth Wave, so there's kind of a nature there. There's classical allusion there. There's lots of things. What are the themes and ideas you think in your work?
Right. Well, definitely. You mentioned the sea and the coast. Always been important to me. One of my first memories is of West Sands in St Andrews. There's a poem in the select poems about that. And when uh, when I was recovering from the head injury, we moved back to Scotland, and we rented a place in Ely for 6 months,
Right?
and that was very important to me. And we've lived around about the East Neuk on and off for the last, oh, God, I hate to think, too many years to mention. But certainly the sea has always been important. Other creatures, uh, definitely, and I think I would have kept on writing just what I would call sort of innocent in some way poems about creatures. but then things happen. You grow old, uh, friends, relatives die.
Mhm.
So yeah, I've written quite a few elegies. And then I came across, a few years ago, came across the work, photographic work of Joanne MacArthur, Canadian photographer and animal activist. And the first book of hers I came across was called Captive,
Mhm.
and it was fantastic photographs of animals in captivity, mostly in zoos. And it had a quite a profound effect on me. And I wanted to write about these photographs, the animals in, and did so. And then I thought, well, there was a certain form to the poems, that they were all in the present tense, uh, all use the first person, and there was quite a lot of repetition in the poems, which I was trying to mirror the sort of zoocosis, which is a sort of mental illness that animals are prone to in captivity. When they're
Right.
sort of moving around or walking round and round their cage, picking at themselves, etc. So that was trying to mirror that in some way, and I thought, I'm not too sure if these poems actually stand on their own, and they're all quite similar, and it's a lot to take on board. So I actually managed to get in touch with Jo herself and sent her some of the poems and said, look, if you really like them, what I'd like to do is to try and bring a book out with the poems and some of your photographs. And luckily, she did like the poems a lot, and agreed to use uh, every photograph that was mentioned in each of the poems. So that's how Zoo Speak came about. So on one page you have the poem, on the other page you have the photograph that the poem relates to. Uh,
That's really
yeah,
interesting because I was going to ask you, one of my questions was, we think of writers as being solitary, that it's a solitary undertaking. But have you collaborated with anyone? But that's a great example of that.
yeah. I collaborated with Joanne on two books, and before that, on Les Animaux, Human Bestiary, I collaborated with Doug Robertson, the Scottish artist, who's probably best known for his collaborations with Donald Murray,
Mhm.
uh, Isabel Dixon, I think, and we collaborated on that book. And again, very lucky. We both liked each other's work and knew each other's work. And it was when I was down in London. He lives down in the south coast of England, and when I was down in London, we met up and decided to work on this book together, which was brilliant. And again, he provided a line drawing for each poem, so it was just fantastic for me. And it changed the with Joanne. I'd written the poems, and obviously she'd taken the photographs. It was just a matter of putting it together.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Human Bestiary one, I'd written most of the poems, uh, but Doug, I don't think had worked on the drawings until he read the poems, and he was very very generous in that he would ask, would you like something about this poem in it, sort of thing, And so we worked on that, and then sometimes the endings or the shapes of the poems changed to fit in with the illustrations. So it was more of a proper collaboration in that way.
And if you do something like that, do you feel any extra responsibility because you've got someone else as well?
Yeah, I suppose it's a double thing. I think you feel that responsibility, but you also get the support as well if you get on and you're working well together. Uh, so you have a responsibility to the partner you're working with, but also they can be a bit of support to you as well. So yeah,
And it's interesting you saying that you're on near the coast, and that's a source of a lot of your inspiration. And it strikes me that the coast of Scotland, there's got to be a lot of poets and a lot of painters running into each other because that seems to be so inspirational. The landscape seems to be so inspirational.
yeah, I suppose so. Yeah,
And nature writing in general seems to be as popular now as I've ever known it. Would you agree with that?
yeah. In different ways, I think there's this new sort of, well, it's a new terminology, eco poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think in different forms, nature has always been, as you say, an inspiration for poets and for, as you say, artists in general. Yeah,
Do you see yourself as writing in any tradition?
I'm not so sure because, as I say, there's. I'm not going to use my accident as an excuse, but there are gaps. There are gaps, and there were gaps before, to be
Right.
honest. So I don't go back too far, if you like, historically in who I've been reading. So I think it's all quite modern. I mean, I think Byron little bits, Keats little bits, but it's mostly when you start to round about the Ted Hughes, Seamus Heaney,
Yeah.
Derek Mann sort of age that I know a little bit about.
Yeah. And are there any particular Scottish poets that you admire?
There have been, I mean, Stuart Conn, who I was lucky enough to read with once. I really like his work. Um, for a while, I was quite taken with Kenneth White's
Mm-hmm.
poetry
Yep.
as well. Um, who else? You see, I did write a couple down. Gerald Mangan, who I think is a really great poet. I've only managed to come across one of his collections.
Mm-hmm.
John Glenday as well. So there certainly are a few Scottish poets that I admire their work. Yeah.
And do you see any difference between written forms of poetry and spoken word, or do you not distinguish?
I don't know very much about spoken word as a genre,
Mm-hmm.
but what I would say is my poems are written obviously down on the page, but where I see them come alive is when I read them and when people hear my voice. And I find that with any other poet as well. If you go to if you can go to a reading and hear someone read. I was lucky at Stanza to hear Galway Connell, the American poet, read there one year. And I think once you've got the voice, it helps not just with that particular poem, but reading their work as a whole, because you have that idea of their voice in your head. And I think that's that. I think poetry should be heard rather than read. Yeah.
Well, with that in mind, Gordon, would you mind reading some of your own work? It'd be great to hear your voice and your poetry.
Okay, I'll read it. I'll read a couple, maybe three poems, and they sort of connect maybe with what we're saying as well. I'll read the title poem, Beyond the Ninth Wave, because we talked about how um, things can change, poems can change, and whether they're relative to you or not. And certainly this poem, when I first wrote it, my idea of Beyond the Ninth Wave was of exile. That
Mm-hmm.
it used to be if you're cast beyond the ninth wave, you're exiled from your country, and that's how I wrote that poem with that in mind. But when I was working on the selected poems, I came across another interpretation of Beyond the Ninth Wave, which I hadn't heard of before, which is in Celtic myth. It's
Mm-hmm.
a portal to the other world.
Right.
Uh, so I can live with both these
Yeah.
references in that poem. I'm quite happy to do so. Beyond the Ninth Wave. What are you given to start with? A boat. No oars, no sails, no rudder. A knife, a flask of water. Beyond the ninth wave, this is all you need. Oars are useless. Your strength soon wanes. Sails are useless. There is no wind. And a rudder is useless. The horizon shows no land. The water is useful. All around you is salt, and the knife is useful to cut out useless thought.
Thank you.
And it's funny because I wrote after the event, I wrote quite a few poems about having had this head injury and being in hospital and everything. And when I came to putting the selected poems together, they weren't so relevant to me now. But there was one that I wanted to keep in because we tried to sue, well, successfully tried to sue London Transport because of the problem with the gear. And part of that process was that I had to be assessed by one of London Transport's doctors,
right,
to see if fracturing my skull actually had any detrimental effect on me at all.
okay.
It's called the Capital Starling. No nightingale sang in Berkeley Square, nor in Harley Street when I was there, sent by London transport lawyers to be assessed. I waited with my partner in a dark corridor. The examination was brief. Their doctor wanted to know which papers I read, what degree I had received, and what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Poetry, he said, was a young man's job. I would soon grow out of it. He talked of how Spitfire pilots, during the Battle of Britain, had got back into the air the moment they could walk. They'd had no need to talk things over. They were too eager to serve. I wasn't quick enough for his dry asides. I left feeling somehow defeated. Afterwards, in the hotel lobby with my parents, I remember my father saying, with his usual bluntness, the poor boy's memory's punk. That night, walking back to our flat in Ealing, our chosen bird was the metallic starling, its slicked back head buried in the capital's litter, its mind like mine, nourished by junk.
Thanks very much.
And I'll just end with one more. I'll end with a more recent one,
Yeah.
which is one of David's favorites. It's called Earthworms, and it's for a friend of mine, Jeff Wood, who's has a more scientific mind than mine. And for some reason, we had a discussion about earthworms one afternoon, and that's where the poem came from. Earthworms, it seems, are made of tongues and are able to taste with every inch of their writhing bodies. What a life of joy they must have, and a life of horror, to not be able to turn off life's every passing flavour. I remember the ones my father and I used to dig up in the back garden as bait for our fishing trips. Could they, I wonder, taste the cold steel of the spade, the shock of the autumnal air, the heat of our fingers as we lifted them from the earth, the plastic of the bag in which we carried them to the river's edge, and then their own blood as we impaled them on the hooks, the chill of the fresh water, the mouth of the fish as they were swallowed. What a life, and what a death, all taste and savour until the end.
Thank you very much for that, Gordon. They're terrific and great examples, actually, across the spectrum of what is in the collection. Just going back to the title again, the Ninth Wave, or Beyond the Ninth Wave, you said that you came across someone who was using it as a metaphor for descent into hell. Was that right?
Well, just the other way. Apparently, in Celtic mythology, it's a portal to the other world, so it's
No.
not necessarily the afterlife. Yeah.
Right. Because when I first got a copy, it made me think of Kate Bush and the
I
B
know.
side. You know that?
I didn't know it until I until I googled it. I saw Beyond the Ninth Wave, and the Ninth Wave. Oh God!
But
Kate Bush.
I think that might refer to what you're saying about that Celtic tradition or the Celtic idea, because and it's a terrific album. It's the kind of side two of Hounds of Love, and it's a
That's right.
6 or 7 song piece. You know, it covers the whole thing. And also, there is a Glasgow band, rock band called the Ninth Wave as well, who I've come across fairly recently.
Well,
But it comes from a quite a famous painting, is that right?
there is, yes, there's a painting as well. I think a Russian artist. I think,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's the original. So, um, that's interesting that you hadn't heard of the Kate Bush one. Do you ever, does that happen to you sometimes when you write something and then you think other people will interpret it in different ways? It's got to happen, I suppose.
It does happen all the time. So yeah, I try not to think of it too much. But yeah, it's bound to, and it's quite right. That's how it should be.
So
Um,
once you've written them and they're out there, then it's up to other people to interpret them as they will.
yeah, and they're on their own as well. Poems are poems are on their own. Yeah.
Have you ever had anyone kind of come back to you with anything that you've really been surprised by and went, "No, I don't see how you see that."
Oh dear. There probably have been, but I can't. Nothing comes to mind at the moment. But no doubt I had. Well, not it's not an answer to your question, but I used to do quite a lot of readings in Germany with an English poet, Desmond Graham, friend of mine, and Desmond Graham's he's emeritus professor of poetry at Newcastle University, and I'm not not at all academic, and we were reading in this venue in Germany, and Desmond read his poems, and then I read mine, and this person said, "Oh, it's nice to have poems for someone that's worked in the sea." And of course, I had to own up. I've lived by it, but I've never been a trawlerman or anything like that. But he thought that was it had to come from that sort of connection, you know.
And when you were doing that in Germany, does that go through a translator or is it just people who know English?
Mostly when we were doing it, it was mostly in universities, and it was their English department. So they were uh, encouraged just to use English. So it was great. Yeah, it's good for us. Yeah.
Well, Gordon, it's been such a treat to talk to you about this collection and your own poetry. Thanks very much for taking the time to do it.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.